Okay, we move on to the next speaker. We Miss Shanti Abraham. Miss Abraham is a lawyer, a mediator, an arbitrator, and a just decade. Wow, this one is very hard for me to
Adjudicator.
pronounce. Adjudicator, based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. She has been called to Singapore and Malaysian Bar and has been in practice for over 25 years. She is the principal mediator with the Singapore Mediation Center and is a mediator on several panels, including Malaysian Mediation Center. And her area of legal practice include corporate and dispute resolution work in the health sector. And she's also advised patients who are considering mediation for medical mishap. She is currently the Vice President of the Medical Legal Society of Malaysia and a member of the Bar Council Committee on Mediation, among others. So she's also have been professionally known in Brunei, Myanmar, Singapore, with a very, very broad experience in medical legal. So without further ado, I would pass this platform to Miss Abraham.
Thank you very much, Professor. That's a very kind introduction. Now, let me just share my slides as well. Okay. Can I check whether everyone can see my slides? I'm going to just assume that we're good to go. Now, very good morning to everyone. Thank you very much to UKM and Professor Azarina, as well as Dr. Hassan, for the invitation to come and share a topic that's very close to my heart on medical mediation. Now, and thank you for that very generous introduction. It is my pleasure not only to share this panel this morning with my colleagues from the Medical Legal Society, but 3 out of 4 of us are trained mediators, and that includes Datin Anid as well as Dr. Hassan. So the one thing that mediation brings to the table is that it is a skill over and above our professional skills, so lawyers, doctors, and we also have accountants, engineers, and people from various professional traditions picking up the skills of mediation and bringing it to their respective industries. Now, one of the reasons why I said that medical mediation is really one of my pet subjects is when I first trained, I've been doing medical negligence for now 20 years, most of the time defending doctors and hospitals occasionally. But about 11 years ago, when I first trained as a mediator, while going through the mediation training, it struck me that medical negligence may be best served through medical mediation. And that inspired me to start conversations with indemnity providers to weave mediation into the dispute resolution spectrum. And it has not been picked up as quickly as I would have liked it to. And as Dr. Hassan says, we are all those of us who are championing mediation as a very intelligent way of solving problems. We haven't given up yet. We continue to try and beat this drumbeat. We recognize that all of you who are coming in as specialists, you may be in the privileged position of being able to echo some of these thoughts, which I'm going to be sharing with you this morning. On that note, slides are not moving. Right. I wonder why. Right. So to begin the morning's conversation, you may note from your program that the topic was about mediation from a medical negligence perspective. But that would be a narrow component of mediation. Mediation is not just for medical negligence, but to the whole spectrum of potential disputes in the healthcare industry. If you can envision mediation as a bridge building exercise where communication is front and center, as opposed to proving who is right and who is wrong, mediation actually plays a role. The mechanics of mediation can play a role in helping to resolve disputes. So in a quick nutshell, a mediation can apply to medical negligence allegations, as you heard from Dato Hassan just now. It can also be applicable to medical misconduct allegations, if the doctors and hospitals are able to seize upon these opportunities early enough before emotions get inflamed and perhaps authorities are activated. At a more non-dispute level, mediation also can be applicable where doctors find themselves having to navigate between unhappy family members who all may think they have the right idea for their patient. The typical response that doctors have is to ask families to have one spokesperson to whom they will communicate with. But silence is not always consent, and you may have brewing unhappy family members who later come back to create torment for doctors who may have abided or complied with the instructions of one family member rather. And we have in the course of my practice, I've had to represent a doctor who was called to MMC, medical council, no less than 3 times by 3 different family members over the same patient. And each of the 3 different complainants, each complained that the doctor did not listen to them or include them in conversations. Now, it made me think that if mediation had been part of the hospital's language of communication, family conferences could have, even if they were hostile, could have involved the role of a neutral person, and that is the mediator, to help navigate a very important decision that would have been for the best benefit of the patient. Now, not only are we talking about external disputes with doctors and patients and their families, but mediation can be a vital instrument, an essential tool for doctor-hospital disputes. Now, we're starting to see a lot more of that, especially with independent contractor arguments, perceptions of bullying by hospitals and doctors alike, on how the interactions between hospitals and doctors can be marred by perception. The role of a neutral mediator, someone who has absolutely no interest in the outcome of that discussion, can be very, very useful. So that would be the broader conversation around mediation. Now, before I talk about medical mediation in more detail, let me explain what mediation is in comparison to, say, litigation, which most people are familiar with. So I'll start with litigation. In litigation, parties are on either side of a proverbial fence, and they are about to spar with each other, each trying to prove that they are right. Their parties are, from a gameplay perspective, pawns in the game, with the lawyers being the playmasters and the judge sitting to decide who is right and who is wrong. The gift of the game is to be able to present the best case so that the judge makes a call to say one party is right and one party is wrong. And the winning party walks off into the sunset joyously. The losing party goes back to analyze whether an appeal is needed so that they have a second bite at the battle station. That is litigation. This would also apply to arbitration, but arbitration happens in a private setting, whereas litigation happens in a public setting. Lawyers like me and Anit and Charlene, we were trained in law school in the tradition of battle. So 30 years ago when I was in law school, nobody talked about mediation. We talked about litigation skill, advocacy skill, how to persuade the judge. Those were the key skill set that early lawyers were trained in. But things have shifted when parties start to see that they want to have solutions that will help them either build back relationships or perhaps find a short circuit to a solution. So mediation started to grow in awareness. And the difference between a mediation and litigation is this. In mediation, the mediation is conducted by a neutral third party. This third party has absolutely no interest in the outcome of the discussion in front of him or her. So in the early days, we used to hear of PICs of hospitals trying to mediate between doctors and patients. That is not mediation, because the hospital PIC has an interest in the outcome of that discussion. So a neutral mediator is someone who will sign off that they have absolutely no interest in the outcome, but are there to help navigate the discussion with the parties. In litigation, a judge can never meet one party one-on-one. Same thing in arbitration. The arbitrator can never meet with one party one-on-one, because it affects the perception of his bias, the perception of bias that he may have, and could and probably will invalidate any decision a judge or arbitrator reaches. But this is where mediation is different. One of the most powerful parts of mediation is what is called the private session between the mediator and each of the individual parties. The typical process that mediation takes place is where parties are, if they are able to sit in the same room, to start the conversation of what the dispute is about. And the mediator is then able to deep dive into the discussion with each party about how they see the problem being resolved, trying to understand what it is that is their underlying interest. So it doesn't become a battle over who is right and who is wrong, even though that is often part of the discussion. The idea is that the parties are then asked to look towards a higher goal on what they want to achieve going forward. Now, in the course of today's presentation, looking at the time, I will share a couple of war stories with you to give you a better sense of how mediation can be a very powerful instrument in the dispute resolution landscape. So when people talk about mediation, people often ask me, what is it? Is it just a facilitated conversation? Is there an agenda? And there is an agenda. These are what we call the high agendas. The high agenda of a medical mediation is to give the parties the chance to explain, perhaps discuss fair compensation, the opportunity to rebuild relationships, in many cases to protect reputation, and fundamentally to understand each other. The beauty of mediation is it is all protected by confidentiality. So you cannot go into a mediation unless you've signed a confidentiality agreement that everything that takes place in that mediation will be confidential and can never be used in a future litigation or court proceedings or in any other public context. Now, this is protected by statute. For Malaysia, we are very proud to say, from 2012, nearly 10 years ago, Malaysia had a Mediation Act which protected two very important parts of the mediation discussion. First, statutorily, the communications in a mediation are confidential. And secondly, it is without prejudice, which means that you can have these conversations, even say sorry, even propose compensation without the other party being able to use that information and prejudice you outside the protection of the confidential mediation. So this is medical mediation in a nutshell. Today's discussion will go through these essential 5 broad categories. We will talk about the genesis of a dispute. How does it start? The causes of escalation. How does it get worse? You may have heard what Dato Hassan said about how it can take 3 months for people to investigate an incident. And that time is what is possibly going to be one of the causes of escalation. Today, I'm going to be talking about that. I will also speak about the challenges of the ground. Why haven't you heard more about mediation? It has been around in the public sphere, on the modern dispute resolution sphere for 40 years, in Malaysia for 20 years, in the medical legal landscape, probably about 10 years. In places like Singapore, they actually have a healthcare mediation scheme, and many of us are mediators in that scheme. But why is it taking so long in Malaysia? We will have a chat about that. Looking at the time, I will share some success stories and perhaps some ideas about going forward. So let's start with one of the fundamental elements of any mediation, whether you're talking about doctor-patient, hospital-doctor, and this applies even in commercial relationships, right? When a party walks through the front door of a hospital or a clinic, what they are saying is they trust. They trust this place to help them solve a healthcare crisis. So then, when things go wrong or perceived to have gone wrong, trust is shattered. Now, I want you to hold the word perception in your mind, because when those of us who are trained in mediation look at any problem, the first thing we are all looking at is what is the perception of each person's part. One of the things we are taught as mediators is to hold back judgment, which is why mediators always say the judges are probably not the right people to do mediation, because the instinct to judge is much stronger in court, whereas trained mediators have learned how to, what we say, hold our upper eyebrow from being raised when we hear shocking things. So neutrality, holding back judgment, these are key for the neutral to play in being a mediator. So what happens when trust is shattered? Immediately, this ripples down to any aspect of the relationship, including communication. So you have an expectation deficit, an adverse outcome will trigger the first instinct, which is that A, doctor is going to cover up. B, hospital is going to cover up. C, insurance is going to give us the runaround, or if you're government doctors, government is going to buat that out and make us fight for justice. So I want you to just keep some of these thoughts in your mind. If you were to put yourself in the other person's shoe, which is another tool that is in our mediators' toolbox, which is to get parties in a dispute to step away from their own position, circle around to the other side of the table, and consider the facts from someone else's perspective. And that is designed to trigger true and genuine feelings of empathy, because once empathy comes into the conversation, we find that that's the magic moment when the mediation moves towards resolution. Oh, these are some of the causes of escalation. If everything goes well, all of us know you probably get some flowers or cake or some thanks. But when there is a poor outcome, the perception of the parties is someone did something wrong. This is made worse if there's poor communication by the doctors or the people attending to the patient. In fact, Dato Hassan and I have had lots of conversations about communication skills being one of the vital teaching points that need to be done in medical school. And I'm so glad to hear that Dr. Hassan is walking his talk by not only introducing medical negligence in medical universities. I believe he is one of the first thought seeders about this. And he's a big proponent of good and better communication between doctors as well as patients. One of the things that we have seen over the years is the tendency for medical personnel, particularly doctors, to use passive communication styles, which is that say less, use silence, and hope that the problem goes away. In this day and age, we have moved from the time 30 years ago, as Dato Hassan pointed out, where perhaps the judges and arbitrators may have been a bit more sympathetic to the medical personnel. Today, they hold medical personnel to as much account as any other profession. Now we come to another very vital part of the causes of escalation, the increasing costs of complications. If you are working in a private hospital setting, I don't need to tell you that one mistake may potentially double or triple or quadruple a patient's hospital costs. These unanticipated costs can lead to tremendous family stress. And family stress then leads to inspiring thoughts of how to recover that money. And unfortunately, if there is a suspicion of negligence, the easy target will be the doctor, the hospital, and their insurers. To compound this, if the resolution structures are complicated, where you need to wait a few months before you get a response, where you need to lawyer up before someone takes you seriously, I can promise you that you are looking at a dispute resolution that will find its day in court. So part of what this escalation, this escalation spectrum is, it starts with a poor outcome. It is bookended by complicated resolution structures. This all is the perfect storm for a full-on medical negligence dispute. I want to circle back to where your patients are when they first come in. When they are still communicating, this is typically what you see when everybody is pleasant and able to speak. Your patient feels vulnerable. And in Asian community, there is an entire family that is going to feel that vulnerability together with your patient. These are the people that you will have to deal with as well as learn how to manage. So before I go on to the other parts of my slides, I want us to take a moment to just reflect on this. For those of you who have read To Kill a Mockingbird, you will know that Atticus Finch was a very famous lawyer. And this lawyer said in the book to his daughter, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. This forms one of the fundamental inspirations behind why lawyers like us not only have now reskilled ourselves to be mediators, because the dispute resolution spectrum is moving in this direction, where to resolve problems is not just in court, not just in the arbitration centers, but now moving very, very strongly into the mediation setting, where people sit down and discuss and try to solve problems swiftly, smartly, and then get back to life as sensibly as possible. So what are the challenges on the ground? Let's get into those. Mediation, in order to achieve its goal, has to be with the right person at the right cost and in the time-efficient manner. What are the challenges that we see? So I'm going to go through quite quickly some practical steps and some pitfalls to avoid. For those of you who are going to be at the front line of some of the potential misunderstandings, and while, like Annette says, we hope you never encountered this in your career, knowing that these are your strategy tools for dealing with potentially unhappy patients and their families, as well as hospitals who may or may not be, may not support you in a time of need. These are some of the things that I would like to leave with all of you. So practical steps: start the right conversation. When something goes wrong, hopefully the hospital that you find yourself with has already got a mechanism to get parties into a room and have the right conversation. How and what that right conversation is something for you to discuss with your advisors, because this is not something that you can speak and return back and erase if you were to overstep the authenticity boundaries. So start the right conversations. From a mediation perspective, once you have put yourself in that confidential, protected setting, you will have the chance to explain what happened, to protect your reputation if there are allegations, honestly a chance to rebuild the relationship so that you can find solutions, understand the difficulties that's coming from the other side of the table, and only if there's really a necessity, to discuss a fair compensation. So I put this in a honeycomb structure because it is not a linear conversation, but a bridged conversation, which will apply to different cases in different contexts. Now, this is something that's very important, perhaps not so much for doctors in this generation, but I will share with you that one of the things that we always say is that 10% of conflicts may be due to differences of opinion, but 90% are due to wrong tone of voice. But don't believe me, just look at how things are discussed in your families. And if you find things going into a skirmish, change your tone of voice and see the power that comes from that change of tone. Second practical step, get the right people in the room. No point if the wrong people are in the room who cannot make the right decision. Who are the right parties? The simplest ones would be a doctor and patient with a mediator. If you have a certified mediator in the room, that whole conversation is protected by confidentiality. You have someone who is trained to navigate when people feel awkward. As mediators, we are taught the 12 meanings of silence. And if you don't know what the 12 meanings of silence are, you can actually read up about it. Silence does not always mean consent. Silence can sometimes mean something is about to explode. In more complex situations where patients feel that they cannot speak to doctors or hospitals, perhaps they have lawyered up. It's still not the end of the world. A wise hospital or doctor can propose mediation, and complex mediations are actually what we see more often nowadays. And I'll tell you why. When a patient feels vulnerable and feels that they're going to be shortchanged by the doctors, their insurers, the hospital, and their lawyers, there is nothing that comforts a patient more than a lawyer sitting next to them, giving them the assurance that what is on the table is fair, what has been said across from the other side of the table is acceptable. Decision-making science. So, this are in advanced mediation, we learn about decision-making science. How people make decisions is a science in itself. I am speaking to doctors. For those of you who understand how the amygdala works, I'm sure all of you understand how the amygdala works. But what I'm trying to say is that with patients, their amygdala will be triggered, and that flight or fight reaction can be triggered by any situation that they feel under threat in. So welcome good lawyers into the room, lawyers who want to try and help patients find solutions to their problems. So who decides this? How does this happen? What will it cost? Who pays for it? Why bother? Where can this happen? All these questions are often asked to us who are in the mediation industry. The right people at the right time, that is something that is really important to identify. You need to make sure that the people who are making decisions come at the correct meeting and not use delay tactics to prolong a problem. You need to give the patient the right about information to mediate. If you hold back medical records, the implication, the perception is that there has been something to hide. Make sure that you as a doctor have enough information to mediate, and that is that you must have access to the hospital records as well. And if you are insured, make sure your insurers have a system that allows them to give the mandate quickly to your lawyers in order to be able to mediate. A quick time to pause and reflect, as I know time is running short. Medical disputes often arise from an adverse outcome or perceived adverse outcome. Fundamentally, there is an expectation let down. As a doctor, by being authentic, you send a message to the patient that you too want to find a solution for what has perhaps taken place. These are things that you need to have handy medical reports, medical records, expert reports if needed. Now, I'm just going to point on one quick point. One of the things that we see in why medical mediation doesn't see some airtime, is because when a problem happens, doctors and hospitals sometimes imagine that if we just keep quiet, this problem will go away. Sometimes it does, but oftentimes you have to bear in mind that quiet seeds can sometimes sprout into oak trees. So moving forward with the right people, the right time, with the right objective. The right objective is to be able to tell the truth, to be able to demonstrate fairness. This will convince the party on the other side that it is worth solving the problem at the table on that day or within that few weeks, rather than having to go to court to get justice. So to achieve a swift and reasonable resolution, this is something that has to be part of the playbook of healthcare providers. Now, a lot of people are worried about manipulation and phishing and party uncertainty. And this is something your advisors, your legal advisors, will be able to protect you from. They will know how to present evidence during the mediation in a way that minimizes these potential concerns. At the end of the day, what needs to happen in that mediation is to demonstrate that the parties want to find a solution, even if it means just an explanation which satisfies the patient. Oftentimes, parties most of the time, parties will attend a mediation with a mandate. I can tell you that most of the time, there will be some sort of compensation in some form, and that is a reality. However, there have been mediations where, through authentic explanation by a doctor, the party has walked away not seeking even a single cent. So, but in order for that to happen, the parties coming to the table need to have two types of mandate: a mandate to discuss and decide, and perhaps a mandate to offer either an ex gratia compensation or a compensation that truly reflects the complication that the patient has suffered. I'm just going to go through a couple of pitfalls as I see my time is almost up. The pitfalls are this: parties who come to the mediation saying, oh, we just want to listen. They come with no mandate. And when parties come to a mediation with no mandate, this is the message: your matter is not serious to us. If it's not serious, the message to the other side of the table is, we will only take it seriously when you take us to court. And if that's the ultimate goal of the doctors and hospitals, you will get what you desire. So this is something that is really important. Even in a mediation, there's really no requirement to disclose a mandate. But coming to a mediation, knowing you have a mandate, helps you to continue to keep the people in the room if it is necessary. The wrong people in the room would be people with no authority or ability to agree, or a person with a vested interest or deemed vested interest. In some mediations, you will find that because, and this has happened in non-medical cases, but lawyers send the pupils to accompany the clients for a mediation. And for those of us who are seniors, we know that no decision is going to be made because the pupil will never be able to guide the party who has come to the mediation in any form or substance. So, right people, wrong time. What is right people and wrong time would be when parties have perhaps not received the documents when they have been asking for documents. Then it is too early to mediate. You need to wait for the appropriate time to mediate. Now, sometimes you see this. Parties have the objective to punish the doctor, or if the doctor or hospital treats it as a nuisance. There is still fodder and there is still a role for mediation. We have seen patients who have been so angry with the doctor be able to deal with that anger in mediation sessions, and those sessions come to a resolution after that. And the reason is, and I want to just point this one out because it's really important, what the patient is really angry about is the adverse outcome. In their mind, they have grown up with the culture that when something goes wrong, someone needs to be punished. What they really want is to turn back time. And with a neutral mediator knows how to diffuse such a patient in most cases, right? So again, even if one perceives the patient wants to punish the doctor, you can still consider mediation if the patient is prepared to come for mediation. Having the wrong conversation is another important thing to bear in mind. If it goes into full defense mode, if it is blame shifting, that will not take the parties further. But with a neutral mediator, they will know how to steer these kind of conversations back into productive communications. So I've covered a few of these things. I think our slides will be shared with all of you. One very quick point is to get patients through the front door of mediations. It starts with a genuine intention of wanting to address concerns. There needs to be transparency, but more than that, there needs to be a system with an ethical agenda. Right now, it is still very ad hoc. Patients don't even know that mediation is a possibility, and doctors are sometimes even scared to suggest it. So that leads patients to only one option, and perhaps that is to escalate matters to medical counsel or to court. Now, maybe because my time is almost up, I will save a success story for when we have the Q&A, and I'll be happy to share some of that during the Q&A. There will be challenges faced by patients going forward, just as much as there are challenges for doctors in healthcare, for providers and indemnity providers. So when devising a dispute resolution system, all the interests of these stakeholders needs to be taken into account. All of you listening today, you need to think about whether mediation fits into the larger objectives of the healthcare industry. Is disputes being resolved in courts feeding that the lasting impact that you want in your delivery of healthcare to the rakyat? On that note, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Abraham, for a very, I would say, you have enlightened us about the mediation. So to me also, I learned a lot from your talk.